All right, well, welcome everybody. Call the meeting to order at 6 o'clock. All right, then we got the consent agenda. John, you want to take over on that?
Yep, sure will. So everybody, the consent agenda, really a little bit abbreviated, but what it is just the board minutes from November 17th and the executive director report. The calendar there has just been updated. We continue to update that just to see the status. So we're doing some board election planning this month. And, you know, we would approve the school calendar once that gets taken care of from the Stillwater perspective. So the minutes are there, November 17th. And then on the executive director report, really the only thing of significance right now, just so you know, is we had an informational webinar last night, about 38, 39 attendees. And our open enrollment period closes this Friday. So we will conduct our lottery on Tuesday of next week. And so start filling the open kindergarten classes for the 2021-2022 school year. And then we will establish the wait list and proceed with that. So that's the information that's there on the executive director report. Also, just the items related to my professional development plan. So those are the items there. So I think I'll just pass it back to Bob if there's questions and so on, and otherwise we can go through the approval of that.
Okay, any questions on the consent agenda? So looking for a motion to approve.
So moved.
Second,
Second.
any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Any opposed? Motion carries. Consent agenda goes forward. Okay. So Nicole, do you want to take us through the election update?
Yes, so I'm looking at the board appointment and the 2021 board election form that's in the board book. This is a little lengthy. I'll try to go through it pretty quickly, but I know not everyone has this in front of them. So I do want to explain kind of how our board normally runs, and then the recommendation for filling the vacancy that we currently have. So looking at the form, we have our board structure consists right now of 8 members. We have 3 parents, 4 faculty members, and 1 community member. For that, we can have anywhere between 5 and 11 members, and typically we run with 9 members. Based on state statute, the board may have a majority of teachers or parents or community members, but currently our board is constituted as a no clear majority. So we typically have 4 teachers, 4 parents, and 1 community member. If a board member resigns, they're able to resign at any point during their term, the board is able to elect or appoint a new board member to serve that remaining term of the person who resigned. So typically, if we want to fill that position by an appointment, what we normally do is we can look back at the most recent election, and if there is a candidate who was not elected, we typically look at them, have our conversations, and we're able to use them to go ahead and fill that vacancy. And that's a pretty normal practice for us. Another way that we can fill that open vacancy is by having an election. But there are some rules to an election. First, we have to give 60 days election notice to solicit nominations. And then we have to give voters 30 days notice before the election. Our normal school elections are near the end of May. And a person who is elected to our board needs to go through a training prior to being seated. So what typically happens is parents or teachers or whoever is elected in the end of May, then they work through the training requirements in June and July, and then they are seated in August at that. And at that time, the outgoing board member ends their term when the new member starts. So of course, that's going to be a little different if someone resigns, but that's typically what we do so that that people who are elected have time to get that training done, so there's not a gap. What we're kind of dealing with right now is that Shane Mueller was voted as a parent member. His children have graduated, and Jim Marcoux, who was our community member, resigned. So what we had done at a past board meeting was we had Shane finish Jim Marcoux's community member term, which is ending August 17th of this year. So he has, his term now is up in August. And then we also have that parent member vacancy open because of that transition. So that's how that all kind of worked out. Are there any questions so far about kind of what's happened or how we roll on the board? Okay, so the recommendation is this. We have vacancies that will be coming up here with Kristen and Jake as their seats will be open this coming May. And then with that, we could include that parent seat that we need filled, and then also Shane's position would also be coming to term. So we would also need to have a community member voted in. So we have, that would give us 4 positions to fill. Not that the people that are working those positions right now can't nominate themselves for those positions, but those position terms do end here soon.
Nicole, just a clarification, I think. So Shane's original term did end on August of 2021, but then when we approved the board minutes from November 17th, what we did is we transitioned Shane's term so that it would end on Jim's term, which is August of 2022. So I don't think.
Okay, sorry.
Yep, no, but that report was based on the fact that we hadn't approved the board minutes. So that's.
Okay, thank you.
That's why it was written that way, sorry.
Okay. So we're recommending to not appoint a parent board member at this time, just for several reasons. One, we don't have any candidates from previous elections who would qualify for a potential appointment based on the practices that we've had in the past. And then just also with that, the timeline that it would take to start kind of over from the beginning would be, we'd have to have time for communication and request parents and to show that they're interested. And then we would have to have them complete voters guides questions. Board members would want to meet with the candidates, and then there would have to be a vote. So that would take, that could take up to 3 months just for all of those things to happen, which then would almost be May. So, and then by the time they were finished their training documents, it just seems that it would make most sense to have it elected, an elected position instead of the board appointing someone for those reasons.
Excellent. All right, so that's the update. It should require no motion to move forward because it would be our normal operating procedure. So next up, Drew, do you want to give us your update?
Sure. So this is the board committee on school reopening group that met December 17th. I'm going to read through some of this. However, a lot of it now as I read through is outdated as of per the governor's mandate and per the RST call and per a bunch of other stuff. So bear with me as I go through some of this, and then obviously we'll get caught up when we get to open discussion items. So the group met. We talked about elementary students moving to in-person learning as early as January 18th, with the gradual rollout of 3 grades every 2 weeks, with at least two transitional planning days used to make this happen. And so the recommendation when they rolled out was K2 back in the building Monday, January 25th, 25. Per the governor's executive order, the earliest they could begin is January 18th. Since we're off the 18th and 19th, and it's the end of the quarter for MLK Day, we're going to use the 2 days to transition, so that gives us 3 days to transition and learning in-person learning on Monday, January 25th. Then 2 weeks later, moving grades 3 and 4 back in the building on Monday, February 8th. This is in accordance with the gradual rollout of in-person learning in the 2-week intervals, so that grades 3 and 4 may begin on Monday, February 8th. Additional mitigation strategies that we've talked about: staff must wear masks and shields as studies in healthcare environment show that this significantly reduces transmission. Specialist classes, except for PE, must be done in the classroom. Lunch must also be eaten in the classroom. During indoor PE, masks must be worn by students. Optional testing for faculty, and that SCPA will offer COVID-19 saliva tests every other week. We've gotten more information about that coordinated and sent out, right?
Correct.
Okay. When teachers cannot be 6 feet away from the students, working to install a clear barrier in between teachers, students is recommended, and a physical distancing of 3 feet or more is recommended for students during in-person learning. The consistent pieces with middle and upper school, grades 5 through 12. These grades are still subject to the Minnesota Safe Learning Plan, county case rate data, and the board approved learning model transition plan. This means county case rate data will be below 30 before we transition to a hybrid learning model. In addition, due to the gradual transition and the rollout of the in-person model, 2-week increments for up to 3 grades, it appears that students in grades 5 through 12 will have to wait until March before returning to school. But we will have more discussion on that. Vaccinations of teachers and perhaps students of age 16 or older can accelerate the return of these students. So some of our next steps was meeting with lower school on Monday, December 21st, the board meeting that we're having tonight to talk about the approval of this. And there's another motion to be brought forward for K4. Facilities planning to determine classroom setup, meal planning to accommodate extra deliveries to the classroom, bus transportation, survey prep to identify how many K4 students are returning, which I saw that go out, need to determine staffing requirements, distance learning survey, and then COVID-19 testing coordination. So those are some of the logistics that we covered. As I said, there's clearly some things that have changed since then. Some things that I will call out per the executive order that brings K through 4 back, but 5 through 12 is still at this moment operating under the board approved learning model transition plan, which means that the case rate needs to be below 30. We understood until yesterday's RST call that 5 through 12 must comply with the rolling start requirement laid out in the amended safe learning plan because SCPA is one building. Per the RST call yesterday, 5 through 12 can operate as separate buildings if divisions can isolate from each other. And obviously this is an important consideration when we get into our discussion here. I think we have things that the COVID response team is going to need to address. A few of them being defining what it means to isolate and what will it take to do that. Is a rolling start required for 5 through 12 hybrid? And with revised quarantine guidelines, can the county case rate thresholds and the LMTP be adjusted. So I think that's what I was supposed to cover. Did I miss anything?
Nope, you got it. I'll give an update as to some of the things that we have taken care of and have changed as well, Drew, because as you have highlighted, this does change. So even the additional mitigation strategies, staff must wear masks and shields. Right now, the shields are strongly recommended. They aren't a requirement anymore for employees, so that has changed. The masks are still a requirement for indoor FIAD, and it's even been implemented for our Minnesota State High School League sports. So that's the practices in sports will do that. And our testing, I think Candace has sent out the information on that, and that will begin on January 25th to coordinate with our first day back for the K4. We have had the meetings with the lower school, and they're prepared for planning for the rollout. Facilities will be moving. You've seen the surveys that have come out. Kelly has tallied those. They're starting to tally those. Those will be completed by tomorrow. And facilities, classrooms, that is being staged in the Aux gym in preparation to move back into the lower school classrooms on, I do believe it's Monday. And Kelly, you're also coordinating the bus transportation, is that correct? So I think that just to flesh out some of the items that were on that report that have taken place since the December 17th timeframe.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. And thanks to everybody on the committee. That was a lot to go through, and appreciate all the hard work on that. So
some of it feels outdated and some of it feels very relevant. Glad we did some of that work, but I feel like we still got a lot of work left to do.
rapidly changing.
I don't know if anybody knows the answer to this, but I've been asked it a few times now. So the order said that the earliest people could return was January 18th, but then I've been shared a number of schools that are not just bringing 3 grades back, but they're bringing like K through 5 back, and they're bringing them back, like in a week or this week even. And so I guess I was just curious kind of how if that was like loosened up too. I didn't hear that on the call, but I didn't ask that either. So I didn't know if there's something I missed with that.
Right. I'll let Candace join in as well on this. But if some schools have already made designations and decisions to move students back into school prior to that January 18th, and they had done it prior to the issuance of the executive order by the governor, then they were allowed to continue with that. If we haven't, or if schools didn't make plans or hadn't have board approved plans to bring students in prior to that January 18th, then that's why that 18th deadline was in place. So some schools had already had some things in place, and so they're allowed to proceed with that. Is that correct, Candace?
Yeah, the deadline was December 16th.
Okay.
If you hadn't made a plan and notified your families as of December 16th, then you could not do anything different prior to the 18th.
I'd just add that I think it's important to note that this came out on December 16th, so it had to already have been in effect when the announcement came out. That's the details are detailed out on page 10 of the Safe Learning Plan. Kristen, if you want to refer to them.
Okay. Okay.
Further points of discussion. Any more questions?
No, I mean, I think I summarized the RST call yesterday a bit, and it was really, I think, nice to hear some of the things they were saying about wanting to help us get kids back in school, and how they've learned over time that the risk for kids is not worth continuing down this path that we've been going on. So that's why I had asked them specifically when I originally asked them about K through 2, and I can't remember if it was 9 and 10 or 11 and 12, but they had said then that they felt more comfortable with younger just because the older kids were in sports now, going back with sports, and they were driving and seeing people. And so they said that they felt more comfortable with, or their recommendation would have been like middle school versus upper school. And that's why I had suggested then we do the 5 and 6 for hybrid at the same time as this, because based on the call, they kind of outlined what that meant if schools were, I guess, separate. And she'd asked on the call, do we have separate entrances that they could use? Yes. And they'd given some examples. So that's why K through 5 wouldn't be ideal, because, or K through 4, because they'd be in the same hallway. And they said that some of the things like eating in the classroom, you know, and John might be able to speak to this a little bit better, but they explained like there's a big difference between that transition time period and after that. Like there's rules that have to be followed during that, but then after that, it changes and it's not as, I guess, strict with things. And I think one of them is eating in the classroom, but then after that, they can be in the cafeteria. It's like that time period. I think, I don't know, maybe like incubation in case people are bringing stuff in and not wanting to mix everybody all at once. But
Yep.
John could probably speak a little bit better to that piece.
Yep. So yeah, let's, all those that were on the call, let's join in on this, but let me just kind of frame. Originally, we had this scheduled for January 7th, and we had trouble confirming that with them. And we finally got confirmation that we did have the regional support team call, but they moved it to the 6th. So that was yesterday. So the purpose of that was to run through the plans and the recommendations that we had related to the K4 implementation. So K2 for the 25th and 3-4 for February 8th with 3 days of planning. And they were fine with that. We explained the rationale. Then what we did is we asked if there were ways to more aggressively get students into the building and how we could accomplish that, what they had seen in other situations. And this is, you know, when we explained that we had 3 different schools, they indicated that if we treated those schools as separate buildings and could do the isolation, then there could be some ways that we could potentially add more than 3 grades at a time or do some additional implementation. So I think for those that were on the call, is that kind of how you remember it? And then Drew, Kelly, Candace, Kristen?
Yeah, and I'll just kind of add a couple of my comments that from what I observed, you know, I think it was clear to me that the RST is there to really make sure that we are making strong, good, and informed decisions.
Right.
But they are not the ultimate approver of our plans or our decisions. Now,
Right.
at the same time, MDH is more advisory. MDE can definitely lay down a hammer, and they have a hammer that MDH doesn't have.
Right.
And what I heard was we don't want to be on an MDE watch list. That would be bad for us. We don't want to end up there.
Right.
So I very much appreciate both John and Kristen asking the right questions on pushing those boundaries around, you know, I really appreciate you both asking questions on if we did this, do we end up on the watch list? If we did this, do we end up on the watch list? And I really appreciate those types of questions because it was pushing the boundaries around what could we do. So that was really important to me from an overall takeaway perspective, that those decisions they're looking to us to have a plan, which is the same thing that we've heard from them all along, and from what I'm hearing at the college level as well. So that was my biggest takeaway in terms of they're not the ultimate authority or decision maker. We have that power and authority, but don't cross too many boundaries too.
Right. Yeah. Because then we'll get a call from MDE. Correct. Yep. Okay.
I do want to make a small point clarification that their recommendation was not middle school, but that there was a risk associated with bringing back upper school as opposed to middle school.
No.
But realistically, excuse me?
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead. I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, go ahead.
Oh, I was gonna say no. I explicitly asked So there wasn't what's your recommendation? It was here's the plan, like that it was from the committee, and then it was can we do we talked about the grades, like can we bring more than this, or are we only allowed that one band? And then they said no, we actually can bring in more if it's separate. They don't want the mingling in the hallways. And so that was when I asked about 9 through 12 or 11 and 12 and then the younger, and then they explained it'd be younger. So I said, you'll feel comfortable with us if we approve doing K through 2 and 5 through 6. And they said, yes, they would feel comfortable with us doing that. So it wasn't like it was an explicit, I feel comfortable with this.
But it wasn't their recommendation.
They didn't give us.
Because we didn't offer them the question of what upper school grades we could bring back.
We didn't ask them for our recommendation without any, we didn't say, what's your recommendation? We said, here's what we're thinking we're going to do. Is this okay for the entire thing? So that's not quite how it works. It's not, what should we do? It's, here's what we're thinking we're going to do.
Well,
Is this okay?
You offered up your suggestion to it as, could we do this? But it was specifically for 5th and 6th.
Yeah, we talked about a couple examples, and they said the younger the kids, the better they'd feel. And
She said the less risk there was.
Right. So
Yeah.
I think, yeah. So just to try and set the tone for, I think what we noticed, the change in the regional service team approaches, and even you see it with the governor's initiative, is they're willing to let us assume more risk. And so we saw that with the example. And so I think when Kristen said, hey, what about 5, 6? And they said, oh, you could do that. And I think with all of this, what they were trying to balance is they want us to make sure that we aren't going to put ourselves in a position where we're going back from in-person learning, back to distance learning, hybrid learning to distance learning, and so on. So I think they're willing to let us assume that risk, but they want us to make sure that we're aware of the fact that when we do that, we may have to make decisions that are going to be cause us to change back. So I think that's the sense that I got from the conversation, from the philosophical approach.
John, could I add one thing to that?
Sure.
I'd like Candace to elaborate on what she heard with that, because it was, yes, we're comfortable with that if you can separate and isolate by division. So there was a big if that it was back on, the onus was on us to truly separate the divisions. And that takes a bit of forward planning and collaboration with our regional, or not a regional sport team, but our COVID response team and our returning to school committee. So that was the pause that I heard, is that we have the authority to go back to our planning committee and find creative solutions to get these kids back, which is what we all want.
And I would encourage us to do that, because, you know, back to this idea of taking on more risk, right? I mean, the mandate to bring K5 or K4 back, nothing changed in the numbers other than the governor said, let's take on more risk to do it, right?
Right.
We also have more data and information that forms kids under 10 really have no risk or are not spreaders or things like that. So I want to call that out, that nothing changed over here for the governor to go, we're going to make this decision over here. The other thing that I as I'm dealing with this more now on the college side, I have become more and more concerned, and there's a great open letter from the president at Purdue that talked a lot about the mental health that is now increasing, the suicides that's increasing, the postponed medical care, opioid death increases. I think there's a lot of other things that are now affecting students and high school students alike. You know, this is written towards a college audience, but you know, Indiana did a great study around learning loss in younger school children in October, found that students had already lost 2/3 of a year of progress in reading and more than a year in math. Mm-hmm. I also have concerns at the high school level around, we are a college prep school. How prepped are these kids going into college next year? And I want to make sure that they're back to get some sense of resemblance of as much of a normalcy into the end of their senior and junior years as we can, knowing that that's a big part of the high school experience too.
Right.
I think the challenge to us as a board is how do we, one, increase the timeline by which we can bring people back in a safe environment. And I do think I like this idea of pairing grades as long as we can separate them and keep them, safe and separated. Because I don't want us to keep doing a 3-grade rollout with 2 weeks in between, and our upper school kids are waiting till, May to be brought back. I think that if we can do better than that for them, we need to do better than that for them.
Right. Well, one of the things we heard today, and this will get to the conversation, was that Mitigation may be bringing back secondary in a hybrid fashion. So, so then that begs the question of, can we get? I mean, I know because Kristen asked about 5, 6, and then 7, 8. Well, do we do K2, 3, 4, but do we do 11, 12, and then 5, 6? So there's, I mean, I think since we'll have to go back, and I think the board will eventually have to address its learning plan with its COVID case rate data, but there seems to be the movement for the reasons that you mentioned, Drew, that they're encouraging us to assume the risk that we're comfortable with so we can address some of the things related to mental health, to kids experiencing their junior and senior year for college prep, and those types of things. So Candace, only because it was mentioned, talk a little bit, since you know this, about the risk, specifically that the virus hasn't changed, but how it relates to the quarantine periods of the 7 days and so on, and what you sense from that particular call.
Yeah, so with the quarantine, the 14 days is still there. That they saw, the data showed them that after 7 days and a negative test, your risk was much shorter. After 10 days, even without a test, 10 to 14 days, people can still get COVID and come back positive, but it went drastically down. So it's like 10% or less. And so that's the quarantine piece. As far as what I heard on the call was that you could do that, but then they said, what I took was that, but let's have and we set up another meeting with them. Well, let's have a meeting because you'll have some data from the first 2 weeks of this rollout, is what I heard. So it's not that we could, or, they didn't say yes, go forward. No, I heard you could do that, but let's meet the week of the 8th. And see how things have been going. So, and I can't, what was your third thing you wanted me to talk about? Sorry.
No, I think that was it. I think that was, yeah.
And I think there, I want to also call out, very excited about the testing. I think we shouldn't underestimate that or undervalue that is now here, right? A dramatically different situation than when we had conversations last fall. So I'll be eager to see who continues to get tested and making sure that people feel that the testing brings a sense of safety and security, which is incredibly important, right? And hopefully that gives us more peace of mind into feeling safer to bring students back. So I just wanted to call that out as the variables continue to change, there's a lot of positive variables headed our way.
Right. So those of you, only to interject, those of you board members that weren't on the regional service team call or support team call, thoughts on this? And because it changes so quickly, this is information that we just found out, 12 hours ago, 16 hours ago, something like that. So what's your thought process on this? Feelings, that kind of stuff.
I have a couple of questions, just I guess about like procedures. And one of the communications that was sent out, it mentioned students would eat lunch in the lower school, like either in their classroom or where 6 feet could be provided. Is that an either or? Is it okay if they're have that 3 foot distance if they're eating in their classroom? Does the 6 feet only apply if they're somewhere else?
So
Do we know?
Well, I think the jury's still out a little bit on that. That could be one of the moving parts. We know that it was specialists in lunch originally were supposed to be in the classroom, and that's for the cohort. And so within the classroom, they can be 3 feet apart. It's recommended more. So if we could get more space, we would do that. But if they ate in the classroom, let's say they were 3 feet apart, well, they're going to have mask offs and they're going to be eating food. So then the question came, and we're getting 2 different answers on this, is could you move them to the cafeteria and have them 3 feet apart and just keep them in their cohort? Because really you're doing the same thing. One of the answers we received was yes, and the other answer we received was no. So that's still an open item.
Okay.
Is that fair, Candace? Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah.
And does that have any impact on the likelihood of having to quarantine an entire class if there was a positive case? Does that make it more likely that we would have to exclude an entire class for 2 weeks or whatever the new number is? Or is that still in the air too?
That one's kind of an up in the air too thing. I've always approached it that I go in the classroom and ask the teacher, where was the student? What did you do? How did things go that day? And really got feedback from them on, was there a lot of movement? Did they stay in their desks? That kind of thing before I determined how did we quarantine? We never quarantined a whole classroom. It was always just kids right around the positive case. But what I'm hearing is that that's still a possibility, especially now with them being only 3 feet away, and I haven't gotten confirmation on this because nobody's quite given confirmation that yes, with that 3 feet, it may end up being a whole classroom. So it's something we need to kind of really work out, and I'm hoping the COVID planning team can really nail down, like, how are we going to approach this?
Can I ask just a quick question about like last fall? I know I got a couple parents that were concerned about eating in the classroom, but my understanding is that was already happening. So it isn't, I guess, a big change, right?
Just the numbers, because
Yes.
there was only 15 kids and now there'll be 30. And they'll be closer together.
Okay, but I think their concern was more like they're eating in the class versus like with, a big group in the cafeteria or something.
Yeah, and we had plans if they'd gone to the cafeteria before we got kind of squelched that there wasn't room to do that we had it marked out that they'd be, and middle school did that. They had assigned seating for lunch and were 6 feet apart and stuff, so.
And I would also say, I think all the work that Candace and team have done around identifying people who are exhibiting symptoms, sending people home in a timely manner, all that continues. None of that stops, right? I mean, you continue to be as vigilant as you've been. At all cases where I've seen so far, even with contact tracing, you don't quarantine an entire class, right? You figure out what the contact has been and you end up making smart decisions from there. But I have not seen one case at any university in America where they're putting 30 kids in a class with a more susceptible audience where they've quarantined an entire class.
We've quarantined a whole class. I can speak well, but it's a little different where we all have kids. I mean, the preschoolers don't have masks on all day, and so we'll quarantine them. But we do look at like video footage to see who's close the whole time. But with the classes, I mean, a lot of times it is the whole class then. So in our experience, it has happened, but none of the kids are wearing masks. The staff are wearing masks. So I could see it happening depending on the situation and where the child's seating. And
Yep.
Yeah, that's why I said, like I said, I've always gone into the classroom and dived in and not just gone, even with the lower school, I've gone in and asked, where was the student? What did you do? Like I said, we haven't quarantined a classroom.
Mhm. Other questions, Christoph, or thoughts, other board members?
And there's, oh, go ahead.
I was just saying, I think most of my questions that I had were answered. So thank you.
When they were saying that, we could bring back, more than just lower school if we essentially treat our building as if it were 3 separate schools, can you elaborate a little bit more on what that would look like from a practical standpoint here? Would be, essentially, would there be like these kind of bright red lines where, upper school stays in this area, lower school stays in this area, middle school stays in this area? Are there areas that would be off limits and out of use because of that? Do you have any sense for what they would require in that scenario?
And to go along with that, Christoph, the staffing, we have overlapping staffing, orchestra, band rooms, gym.
Candace, any?
Oh, sorry. I was gonna say so for the different grades, and correct me if I'm wrong, John, but my understanding is that's for like the gym, that is no different than bringing K through 2, because you can't use a space like that if you have more than one classroom, like more than one grade. So if you just bring K through 2, you can't have all the grades in the gym. So doing K through 2 and 5 through 6 isn't going to change that fact.
Right. Yeah, I was, to be honest, I was confused by what they meant by the isolation. I think we need some clarification. I know they were concerned about, like you said, Kristen, they wanted you have separate entrances. So now if you isolate them, I don't know what that means about our common areas. I don't know what that means about the atrium, the cafeteria, the gym, if it means that only, because they mentioned this, if we bring 5, 6 back, maybe they don't have gym for a month or something like that. I don't know if that's part of the isolation. So I think that's something we have to try to figure out. I don't know if they just need to stay in that wing all day. I honestly don't know. Candace, did you have a thought on that, or what they meant, since you're closer to that?
Now I'd want clear defining information on that as well, with us being one building. I think they said, yeah, if you can isolate, but we never really elaborated other than those few things about the doors and a little bit on gym. I don't think we really dived into and got complete answers on what did isolate mean.
And that's where it did get a little confusing. And I think part of that, Kristen, is when they talked about after that initial period, they could go to the lunchroom, but then who got to go to the lunchroom and who got to use the gym was a little hazy on that.
Well, my understanding of what they're explaining was when you're bringing all the kids back, you're not wanting to have for that transition time, the shared spaces. And so whether you're doing K through 2 or K through 2 and 5 through 6 and 11 through 12 or whatever it is, none of them would be able to go and use the gym during that transition period. And what they talked about, some of the examples we discussed in the call was like, I can't remember if it was Kelly or Candace, but somebody who said, okay, we wouldn't be able to use the atrium, for example. We talked about how K through 4, for example, couldn't be brought back at once because they share that hallway. So separation, they gave examples of separate floors, separate wings. So the goal is, so that they said like in the same classroom, but they did acknowledge, because we talked about like the buses. You're going to have different grades on the buses. And so they said that they understood that and that was fine. They want to see them masking, they want to see the ventilation and 6 feet from the driver. And they said, then it just might mean you have more people you have to quarantine. But so I think it's the separation. What they talked about was the floors, the wings, K through 4 couldn't, because they'd be mingling, and the spaces that can't be shared, what they talked about, like the cafeteria they talked about, because I know that was asked. And then they said, if it was going to be used, you had to have the 6 feet, but then you couldn't have right away, K and then 1 and then 2 all going in it. You'd have to get past the transition time period, and then they could use that as a like alternating space, was my understanding. I don't know if Drew, you heard something different, but that was kind of what I got from it.
I heard.
Good.
I actually heard something different than that. So that it just emphasizes the need to clarify this before we assimilate any more kids, because that was a whole new option for us before we got on a 30-minute call, and we were teed up to talk lower school, and it really opened up kind of Pandora's box as we're all trying to unpack and what we heard. So we're needing to dial into that a little bit more. I heard that middle school needed to act as a separate building. And so if that space is designated, the common spaces are designated for lower school, then middle school students cannot enter that building or that portion of the building at any point during the day. So
Yeah. So I mean, I guess that's why I was asking, because that has huge implications depending on what that answer is. I mean, that's everything from, music programs, right? I mean, the 2 music classrooms are in the upper school part. So that mean that middle school wouldn't have access to music, or at least not access to those rooms. Like upper school art is down, on the other end by the PAC. And so would an upper school student just not be able to have those art classes? Even sending somebody to the nurse, right? I mean, the health office being where it's located, does that, would we have to come up with essentially a way to have 3 separate areas for students to go to a health office? So I think getting an answer to that is really imperative before we try to move forward with more than what they initially said we could proceed with.
Jake, Deb, Nicole.
As I listen to our discussion tonight and think about where we were at even just a couple of days ago and how we've changed, I feel really excited that we have a plan to move forward for lower school, and that we even have a plan to think about bringing in the upper school and middle school kids. It's a very exciting thing. I'm so grateful that we are moving kids back in the building. That just makes me so happy and so proud, and I can't wait to get moving. And so for that, I'm just really grateful to get these kids in. I'm so ready and so happy that kids are coming in, and I'm ready to move forward. I just want to hold back just slightly and just talk a little bit about, are we ready for middle and upper school right now? Or can we just hold back a tiny bit and learn a little bit before we do too much too fast, so we don't hurt ourselves going in too fast and end up in a bad place, and do something that's going to send us into distance. I just want to caution us to take a steady approach that we've done very well so far, and do this carefully and without messing up something that we've done well so far. So I just want to say I'm so thankful and grateful that we're doing a good job and we're ready to bring lower school in. And I just want to say, let's cautiously and carefully, but aggressively approach bringing in middle and upper school and do it well. From what I'm hearing, we have a lot of things to discuss and work out before we're ready to do that. We're not ready to bring them in on tomorrow. I don't know if we're ready to bring them in on the 25th, but I just want to say, from what I'm hearing, we've got some things to work out. Lower school, we're ready.
Okay. Jake, Nicole.
Yeah,
Oh, sorry.
I'd like to, well said, Deb. Just second what, this idea of, doing it right. So we're not doing this sort of ripsaw back and forth. I think all year long, that's kind of been the scariest thought of kind of bouncing back and forth, just the operations of how everything in the school works, how classrooms work, but just also, broader than that, how the school works, having to go, back and forth and all these transitions, and, doing this thoughtfully, and just, I guess, being excited about having the ability to have this discussion right now and keeping it positive, that we're, moving in the right direction finally, and then just being thoughtful about seeing that through well. So then when we take that next step, it's on solid ground.
I agree with everything that's been said, Deb and Jake. Thank you. I'm also excited about how we can get more kids back. I think that it's important that we worked really hard as a team to create this plan, this based on kind of the numbers. And if we're going to move away from that, then we need to think about, like, what is going to be our criteria of of getting back and not just like throwing something out there and making a decision. So I do want to be really thoughtful about that, because we worked hard with our administration and faculty and, you know, those state guidelines to figure that out. So I think that's going to be important, that we make sure that, you know, everyone's on board and feels that we're taking a, you know, a consistent, fair, safe approach. And just really quickly, I just want to do a little shout out to the EAs and our SPED in lower, middle, and upper school. And I appreciate Sarah Wenner in the lower school just reminding me of this, because we have a lot of staff who are currently in the building working with students one-on-one and in small groups in a very close, less than 3 feet situation. And just want to just formally say that, you know, I appreciate them. I know parents and board members also, I know that we appreciate those EAs and SPED teachers who are really putting themselves on the front line for those students.
Thank you. I would just
Thanks, Nicole.
extend that to the distance learning support team. We have about 50 kids here who are children of essential workers, and we do have a strong team of teachers and EAs who interface daily. So,
Thank you.
Thank you. Very well said.
May I, just a quick question for staff. So right now with the current rates and the current decreases, we're now at 44. If we even have close to the decline we did the last period or the period before, we're going to be in the threshold for hybrid. And our adopted plan says that if we have the weeks of declining rates and then 1 week below the threshold, we can go to hybrid. So I guess I'm a little concerned to hear that a lot of this surrounds being prepared, because we've told the school community we're going to hybrid on the 20th. It looks like the case rate data is actually going to support that, even just following the plan as it is. And so I guess it concerns me that we've known that, at least with the plan, we've seen the declines, and we're saying now that we're not going to meet again for a month. So this wouldn't even be adopted then until the end of February. So we could be like 7 weeks into these rates, when we've publicly said that our commitment and our priority is getting kids back in school. Right. And so I guess I'm wondering how that works logistically. So say the next week it is that low. Are we going to have an emergency meeting then? Because I feel like we should be, if it does go that low.
Yeah, Kristen, let me ask this question, because I think, and everybody that was on the call, I think that was the question that spawned some of the conversation we had, because we said, you know, that right now it's not that we have a mandate, but we can certainly move forward with K4. And so we have the dates and everything that we can do with that. And then I think the question that we asked was, what happens if the case rates can fall so that they meet our learning model transition plan? Can we mix the models? I think that was the question that spawned the conversation, but I don't know if we ever did we get a specific answer on that? Or was that, do you know what I'm saying? Because that was.
You asked, you brought up, you said, can we bring middle and upper school back at 60 or 50? And they shared it was fine. They said the importance is the case rate data is not the only factor to look at. It's just a factor. And they said that with those rates, the importance, that's when they got into the cohort. From there is when they talked about how the key is with the cohorting. So not at 50 or 60 though is what I'm saying. I'm saying next week, I mean, with the current rate of decline, I think that there's a pretty high chance that it could be 30 or less.
Right. And even right now, if we had, I think if it was, well, it's 44 now. So I think even now under our plan, this would be the time when we would announce that at least lower school would be going to hybrid, at least at a minimum. So.
John?
Yep.
Could I just add what has changed? I think I appreciate you bringing that up, Kristen, that we left on November 23rd with the target date of coming back on January 21st, and so much has changed. So why aren't we hitting that target? And so much has changed. And the big thing that has changed is that we're focused on bringing nearly 400 kids in person to the lower school. Last fall, we had 475 kids in the entire building. So we were targeting getting to hybrid for the whole building by January 20th. We will be pretty close to that by having, actually, if we continue to have our essential worker and special ed kids in middle and upper school, we're going to be very close to the same number of kids in the building on January 25th as we would if we had gone to our hybrid model on January 20th with case rate data. But what has, now that we are bringing in, and we are one building, so it makes things a bit more complex. So we're bringing in lower school, and because of that, to assimilate middle and upper school, we need to cohort. And that is what has added a layer of complexity that has caused us to pause. So that that's where the discussion needs to happen. I'm not saying I wouldn't be in support of doing it. I think it needs to go back to the COVID response team and the return to school team that we've set up to establish how that will be done. Can it be done? So I don't know if that addresses why we aren't going back on January 20th and have missed that target. We still have so many questions to answer before we set that date.
Okay. So logistically speaking, what are the concerns if we did have 5th and 6th go back?
Well, for me right now, I don't have any concerns, but given what, it's taken me a while to wrap my arms around the changing elements from the support team, which to me, it's good news. I think it's good news. So they've given us the opportunity to take a look at students and to say, we will accept the fact that you can take more risks. So I think that opens up the planning for us. So for me, I would say perhaps it's not 5, 6, but should we make consideration for 11, 12? Should just because of what was said about college prep and about the graduation and that experience, let's move forward with the K2, 3, 4 as planned right now, and then as quickly as possible do an evaluation and to say what are the next best grades that we should get back in. I mean, maybe it's 9, 12, the first year of high school and the last year of high school. Maybe it's grade 5 in person. I think what it does is it opens up some of the flexibility to say what are the ways that we can do this that meets the needs of the kids. So for me, it's not the 5, 6. It's like, is that the right grade? Is 5, 6 the right grade? 7, 8 the right grade? And that's my perspective. So I think what happened is when we asked the question and then you asked, so can we add 5, 6? And then can we have 7, 8? I think, and they said, you could do that. Candace would say, they said, you could do that. Candace would say that was how it was said. But I think what it did is it opened up the opportunity to say, can we do something for 9th graders? Would that be good? I don't know if that's good. Andrew and Christoph and the team would know if that's good. Is that the next step? Is it 9th and 10th grade? Is it 11th and 12th? Should we focus on 5, 6 in person as opposed to hybrid? So to me, it's not about to me it's about probably more along what Deb said, as quickly as possible, do an evaluation with the committee that did the first work and the COVID response team, the teachers, the administrators. Where can we get the most benefit from bringing in more kids as quickly as possible, and where should that be? Because I liked the fact that you asked the question 5, 6. I mean, like we said, we tried to, as Drew said, we tried to press them. And so when you asked them, they said, yeah, it didn't seem like we would be on the concerned list if we were careful about our presentation. So I just want to make sure that we're thoughtful about the grades maybe. That's probably what I would say right now. I'm more optimistic about the opportunities that are in front of us now. So I just want to make sure that we look at that. I guess that's my comment.
And I think that's the right question for you and the administration of the school to be looking at, right? What are the more critical places by which we start prioritizing who gets brought back and where? I would also partner this kind of with the idea, and the guidance that I heard from the regional support team that I would take heed and caution with is separate as much as humanly possible, right? You're trying to basically turn one building into as many safe buildings as you can. So maybe we can only turn it into two, but I think also before the break, Candace had some really awesome out of the box ideas of what if we went to the church down the road and we use some of their space, and yeah, it's not going to be an ideal situation. People are not going to get to leave their classroom for an entire day sometimes, but we have all agreed it is better to be back face to face than it is to be in a remote and distance learning environment. And it's not going to be permanent. It'll be a temporary amount of time. So I think, a smart next step on the administration side is to have the conversation of prioritizing grades. I think the COVID response team and the segmented board group that I'm happy to keep working with on, how do you separate out the building or make it as safe as humanly possible to bring back as many as fast as possible, I guess. And if we are willing to really consider an alternative site, perhaps it's 9 and 10 come back at the same time, 3 and 4 do, and then 5 and 6 comes back in a separate location. I don't know, right? I mean, so many logistics to consider there. Christoph asked a lot of really good questions, but none of them were questions that I went, no, we can't answer that. And that's a game stopper for us, right?
Right.
I think we can answer all those questions. So I think we need to take inventory again of the questions and concerns again at this point, and then go back to work and start answering them to get a timeline back together and bringing people back.
Right. And when you mention that, I would say as soon as possible. I mean, it's as soon as we possibly can. Because as Kristen's saying, I'm looking at the case rate data for the one that's published by the University of Minnesota, and it's trending up a little bit, but even we got the indications that we'll probably be in the that they thought even by February we could still be in the 40s. So that's not that feels a lot better than where we've been. So
Is there a way that we can schedule a board meeting sooner than is our next one in a month, right?
Don't we have a January?
When's our next one?
I thought it was like 26th of January.
The 26th. What's the?
So that's in like.
So if we were to do that, I mean, we wouldn't have enough. We need to keep the meeting, obviously, because maybe we can get some of these answers, but that would be like day 2 of having kids back. So we may not have a whole lot of answers as far as how it's going, but we might be able to get some of that discussion about how do we turn this into different buildings? How do we handle the staff that crosses over? Do we need to, I don't know, we might be able to address some of those issues at that meeting, but I think.
But I believe that's the job of the COVID response team and the Bringing Kids Back to School Committee, that we can bring a strong recommendation, almost a decision tree, go, no go, depending on how. So the criteria would be, if it goes well, what do we do? What's our plan if it goes well? If it doesn't go well, what's our plan? What are those thresholds? How are we going to define if it goes well, if it doesn't go well?
Exactly. That's if we, the things that like Christoph brought up and Jake and the rest of the teachers, the things that we wouldn't necessarily think of, art, music, how are we going to handle that? The kind of common spaces, because even though we were allowed to make it 3 buildings, it's still really not. So that's important to take into the consideration. So
And you're a facilities guy, aren't you?
absolutely.
What's the plan
So-
right
so-
now for those, for like art and like with K through 2, K through 4 coming back? What's the current plan?
Nicole, do you know, or can you share that?
I think just based on conversations with Ms. Carroll, it sounds like, and Deb, please tell me if I'm wrong, but it sounds like because students have to stay in the classroom and not leave, that art would be in the classroom, music would be online, and then for FIAD, they would go to FIAD.
Correct. Yep.
Got it.
Five.
On to the additional building or suggestion that was tossed out. And that's a road I was going extensively down prior to December 16th. And that was the date the governor announced the softening of the safe learning plan as far as its the tolerance of risk to prioritize getting the youngest learners in. And so the fact that our greatest focus was to get the youngest learners in, and knowing that K4, we would have the authority to bring them back regardless of case rate data, and that in fact, what we can deduce from that plan is that there's becoming a de-emphasis on case rate data and a prioritizing of taking risks to get kids in to learn. So that put us in the direction of the amount of resources and time, and I don't have my spreadsheet pulled up, but the factors that would go into creating a second learning space is exhaustive. Technology is a start. Spacing, setting up the facility. We deduced at that time that we were really tracking hard and it was becoming a priority to get kids back to school, and that our resources would be better directed toward opening this school back up. And then yesterday put us on a different turn, and we're in discussions. We've met with the COVID response team today and are getting ready to make recommendations to you as to how that can happen and when it should happen. We're identifying the questions that weren't really teased out in that 30-minute meeting yesterday, that it took a different turn. So, sorry, I got distracted with the chat code. So we are actively moving toward getting kids in this building and are not currently actively looking at other facilities because of the amount of resources it would take to accomplish that. So if the board wants to direct us otherwise, you're the boss. Please.
What if we, let's see. What, the 26th is the board meeting, is that correct? Yeah, we aren't going to have any data, but at the same time, I think we've learned a lot through the planning, but I want to,
Can I pose a question to the staff quick about kind of the logistics of hybrid versus in-person?
yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, because it pertains to this, because like I completely agree with Kelly, the work that would go in for everyone to create a whole new facility, especially since there's 4 months left and this isn't going to be how it is next year. And so it would be so much. But for staff, now that the conversation is happening about, maybe John had said, like, maybe we'd bring a whole grade in person. From what I've heard, hybrid is really hard. Like it's really hard. Do you feel you'd prefer it if kids were coming back to be in person versus hybrid?
Well, I mean, we're in a spot now where we can call it in person, but it's going to be hybrid no matter what, because there's still going to be students that stay in distance, right? And, you know, it's our obligation to continue to give those students an education. So, yeah, I think, you know, across the board, everybody has found hybrid to be difficult. And we all are thinking fondly back in those days when we were in person. But going forward, I think no matter what, we're doing hybrid. And so I guess it's just not a choice, because the hybrid's going to be there no matter what happens next.
Sure.
I think the difference on that for hybrid, of course, that's what we're still going to be doing. It's that we won't have kids alternating in and out and in and out versus I have the same kids all day here at school and I have the same kids all day at home. So if it were, I think, an option to have hybrid, the alternating days versus in person, AKA that's still going to be some hybrid. I think that people might prefer consistency either way. So consistency with all distance or consistency with one way.
Yep.
Is that fair to say, teachers?
Yep, but it's true that teaching two models where I have kids in the classroom every day in person, but I still have to teach some at home, which I'm going to call a hybrid model, is onerous at best, difficult.
Do we know what the plan would be if we move forward with bringing lower school back on, or at least K2 back on the 25th? Well, I know first and second originally had at one point like a dedicated distance teacher, and then that model switched. Would you guys in the lower school still have to keep that kind of regimented schedule that you have?
We're waiting to hear the details until after the results of the board meeting tonight.
Okay.
And the survey is impacting that a bit too. I'm not survey, registration. We have two different terms out there meaning the same thing, but we're asking parents to commit. So depending on the percentage that would be still selecting distance learning, that will impact. It's kind of the chicken and the egg.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I was wondering, I don't know. I was wondering if there are maybe parents that would change their decision based off of some of that information. I don't know if the numbers would, if you expect the numbers to fluctuate a lot once you roll that number out, or yeah.
I think we're expecting a little bit of fluctuation and have tolerance understanding that as the distance learning details, what that really is going to look like. And this is just in conversations that we've had in anticipation of what the results will be, is there will be a chance to retract your decision once, between now and when distance learning or January 25th comes, or February 8th, as that takes shape. There will be one-on-one discussions if people wish to reevaluate based on the details, but it's a little bit of a chicken and egg, as I said.
Thank you. Sorry, I'll ask one more. I know there in the latest parent update, there was postings for the lower school staff, and at one of the previous meetings, I know Peggy Roselle mentioned, I think she was on at one point. I don't know if she's still with us or not, but at one point she was mentioning issues with staffing. Have those been resolved? Do we feel like we will have the appropriate staff ready to go on January 25th, or are those positions that they posted positions we would love to fill, but not necessarily required to come back? Does that make sense?
It won't stop us from coming back. We have a temp agency that we can use for any of those that are a must-have to go. So in the special ed realm, especially.
Yep.
I will advocate for the kindergarten teachers to get, if there's anyone out there who wants a 3-hour position to help kindergarten, we really could use that.
We have 2 open in that. We have secured one of those 3 positions. So
perhaps someone who has to have been home teaching their child at home is freed up now that they can send their child back to school, and we're hoping that's going to happen.
So I can't make a motion. No, but to move this forward, I think we should plan and make a motion to move this, the K4 stuff forward. I would like to, just from what people have said, to do some of the planning. And on that meeting on the 26th, we should have aggressive plans for what additional rollouts could be. As aggressive as, because as Kristen has said and made a good point, if this case rate continues to be where it's at, I think we have every reason to move forward aggressively, but we want to do it very intentionally. So that could be, so if we get to the 26th and we have a case rate that's still 40 or something like that, we should, I think, have plans in place for maybe adding additional grades in the upper school or the middle school. And that could that be as soon as the 8th of February? Could it be the 15th? I mean, I just think we need to, I think we need to not be shy.
So John, you're saying your biggest concern really isn't the logistic things, it's about which grade, prioritizing grades. So if that's a concern, what we learned from K4 may not be as important. Should we move the board meeting forward a week to give us a better jump on getting these kids back in school? If really we're just looking at which grade is it going to be, talking to the principals, talking to who, really talking to the teachers, who is really going to best benefit from them? Do we really need information from how it rolls out with K4? If we just really need to prioritize which students are going to benefit from this best? Do you want to move that forward a week instead of waiting till the 25th?
I don't know that because we're getting different information. I just want to make sure that we know what isolation means. We know what potential schedules are like. When they say isolation, I'm kind of like, originally I'm thinking like Drew and Kristen, like, well, okay, I can have kids in the gym, and then 5 or 10 minutes later I can get middle school kids in the gym if I do the cleaning. But is that really what they mean when they say isolation?
No.
Dang, see, there I go. Okay, so I'm an optimist. So
I also think it's important to know. Go ahead.
Well, just, following the case rate and what we had done before versus what it sounds like the regional support team has said doesn't feel like it's matching up. So I'm a little confused, like if the case rate data is low enough, and that's what we've decided as a board to use as our criteria for bringing students back, then why do we need to follow these additional rules? Why couldn't we just bring back all of middle school and all of upper school out and do these things? So that, I guess that's the part where I would like clarification at some point.
Because last fall we didn't have the isolation requirement, and that does add it adds complexities that can be worked out. So I think we're being very optimistic. I'm not the most optimistic person, so I think, and what I heard on the call yesterday is there is reason to believe that the case rate data, though it is coming down right now, will come back up based on the governor's announcement yesterday with youth sports opening up, restaurants opening up, bars opening up, elementary schools coming back. We've all been pretty buckled down. We got the case rate down, as the governor said, because we did what was asked of us. But now we are opening up the doors. So we don't know what will happen with that. So yes, there is the ideal solution to solve is bringing kids back, and the case rate is below the thresholds that the learning model transition states. But I think the more likely scenario, and from what I heard on the call yesterday, is we should expect the case rates to be going back up because of the opening of things. So what to do then? Is there a tolerance to bring kids back even when the case rate is going up? And that's the questions we need to determine internally, though and also with the regional support team. I heard the regional support team offer to answer questions as we're going through these discussions, so we don't have to wait until February 8th, which is our next scheduled meeting, to interact with them and get clarification. So they will be available. I think that is the more important plan to have in place, is what do we do with the middle and upper school as case rates go up? And I don't know, Candace, John, anybody else, did you hear that?
Yeah,
Yes.
so go ahead, Bob.
To the point, yeah, I mean, we're kind of dealing with two separate things. The learning model that we already agreed to is going to need a revision, and we're going to need a good plan from both the committee and the COVID response team. So should we look to have that group get together next week and start pursuing an aggressive but practical plan? Because we could be back below 30, and then we'd be back to the hybrid model being available across the board. But with distancing, that's it's complex. So
Yeah. So I'd like to keep like the 26 mainly for to do the work to get the questions answered, and then maybe on the 26th when we come back, we have the discussion with the board. I mean, because obviously here we are, the board spent the fall doing the case rate data, the learning model transition plan, and those listening, teachers, faculty members, I'm sure are like, well, now why are we changing? I mean, what's changed? So we have to be able to address that particular question. And we have to do it so it's the satisfaction of the community. But at the same time, the message is pretty clear that they want us to assume a bit more risk. And also, I think what we don't want to get lost in this is there seems to be a very high emphasis on the youngest learners. They want these kids back in school. So we want to make sure that we do that very, very well, and make sure that that gets done right. But on the 26th, when we do the work, if we say, let's bring back 5th grade and 12th grade in some capacity, I want us to, if that's what bears itself out. Now, I know the teachers that are listening to this are throwing darts at me right now because they're saying, well, yeah, we've got all these different teachers that do that, do this, and I teach multiple grades and all those things. Those are things that we at least want to discuss. But if we can make an effort to get kids back in school and have the experiences that they should have, and senior year, for instance, or transition years, that's what we're supposed to do. That's what we're supposed to do.
So maybe the directive for kind of what is presented at the 26th meeting is to determine what grades should come back then, like first. So
Right.
which two in middle and which two in upper for the first round, with the goal of everybody back maybe March, assuming things don't go crazy. But I think at the same time, even with the case rate, we talk about like if it goes back up to 40, but they made pretty clear when you asked, what if it's 50 or 60, that the case rate data is not what we should be prioritizing on. It should be what we're experiencing in the school. So if we have transmission in the school, like outbreaks, kids passing it to kids, that's where we get concerned. But that's why the American Academy for Pediatrics came out this week and said, transmission in schools mirrors the community. It isn't the cause of the community transmission. And so I think with the conversations about risk, I think it's really important that it isn't just they're okay with us taking on more risk. It's they make clear like it's taking on more risk because they know the risk of not doing this on kids.
Right.
It isn't just you should take more risk. It's they know now with so much research how much this is impacting kids and families severely. And though that is not worth it. And that's why the governor was willing to do this and why we're moving in this direction. So I think I would be comfortable if we're saying, okay, at the 26th, which grades are we going to go back first? And then we know like it's moving forward and we have something to share with all these parents who, have been working very hard as well, home,
Right,
some losing
exactly.
jobs, some losing work, because they're home now. And so I think we need to really keep that in mind, because I heard many times over the last couple of months how disheartened and discounted parents feel. And so I think we should really be like careful about keeping the focus on all stakeholders.
Yep. So I think completely agree. And I think the hard part about this, and I think all of us can admit to this, is for the longest time we've been told, and we were introduced to it in the end of July, county case rate data, county case rate data, county case rate data. And then all of a sudden it's like, well, no, that doesn't matter. So there are reasons that they've changed some of that emphasis, but it's hard to, sometimes that's hard to explain. So when Candace mentions the risk and some of those things that, and why the policies are changed to assume more risk, sometimes it's hard to get everybody to understand that. So that's part of the dilemma I think that we have with that. But you are exactly right. It's strongly encouraged now that we should be aggressive in getting kids back into school. I think the concern we probably have, and I'm not sure if this is because of the trend, but when we went from, when we saw the case rate data go from 50, 58 to 85, that was in a week. And then we did see the community spread reflected in the school. We just want to make sure that we're cautiously aware of that case rate data and make sure that we're monitoring it so we're protecting that school environment.
Candace, how many cases have you confirmed actually were transmitted within St. Croix Prep? Because that was actually a question I got asked, and I know as of early November it was still 0, but I don't know if that's changed. That were confirmed to be transmitted within the school.
Is Candace on?
Yep.
Yeah, I'm still here. We never, we didn't track. I mean, we didn't dig that deep. We didn't drill down to where that was, especially November. During November, we had enough trouble just keeping up.
Yeah, just logging it. Yeah.
So we never drilled down. And when you have community spread like that, that's what community spread is most of the time it's unknown.
Right. And with that said, at the same time, and the reason we didn't spend a lot of time with it is because we started to notice people that were in the same room in school that were now getting it. But because of the community spread, did they get it in school or did they get it because of the transmission outside? We just really didn't know. It was becoming so prevalent that we just really couldn't accurately determine whether it was in school, but there was a strong possibility that it was. But,
Sure.
but you just can't know because we've had yeah.
I just want to add that it wasn't the illnesses that caused, it wasn't the student illnesses that caused us to shut down a week ahead of what we said we would. We shortened our notice that we had promised families we would give them because it was closing in on us with our inability to staff. The quarantining and the illnesses among staff was making it untenable to staff. So case rate data does have, it is correlated to our ability to staff, and that was where the tipping point hit. So
Sure. So I asked that because I know it's hard to, you don't go that deep, I guess, but in our school, when we have cases, if we have, a child and then we quarantine their close contacts, they usually have to tell you, did they test positive or not? And then we know, like, if the teacher tests positive and their student was in their class and they had to quarantine, we could tie those definitively together. And so it sounds like maybe none yet, but I would strongly encourage us to at least track that, because if we have to quarantine, say, a whole class and you find out a couple of them tested positive, then that's good information, because then it's likely from that classroom. Versus if none do, which happened many times in our case where a teacher was in there positive, but no one did, that's also good information too. It echoes what I think research has been showing.
Well, I think if you follow the other decision that we have for a reason for more tolerance for this now is, I think the consequences of what we are seeing in other areas outweigh the risk of bringing students back. And if you look at 19,000 cumulative cases in Washington County in a population of 250,000 people, That means we're averaging 1,911 cases, less than 2,000 cases a month in the county, of which 5 to 18 represents 1%, and 19 to 34 represents 1.9%, and 35 to 49 represents 1.7%. So if you told me that the risk was 98% that I don't get it, but I can be back in school, or there's a 2% chance that I might get it, or even if you made that 5%, I would still say, and you can call me insensitive, yes, get me back to school, because that is worth it to me as opposed to a 5% chance of me getting this. Especially when the median age case rate, we've had 187 cumulative ICU cases, and the median deceased age has been 82. The young kids are not, even if they're getting sick, they can get sick, they will get better. And if you are in any case high risk, or you're nervous, or you're scared, you still have the decision not to come back. And I think that is also still there for you. So I think we just have enough information now at this point that the consequences of what we are seeing in other areas of our lives are not worth this, and we want to come back.
Right, right.
And we have to keep in mind the staff's comfort level. I know parents, I've heard it through the grapevine, I'm not on the social media accounts, but that parents aren't feeling as valued as the staff. And I don't believe that's the case, but I also we have to realize that the teachers are the ones working with these kids directly, so they need to be brought along in the process.
You know, I've seen that, and I mean, I think if we're really honest, there's some truth to that, because I think that the decisions we've made has been to be on the more risk adverse side of things because of the staff concerns. And I think parents increasingly are getting very frustrated because they're impacted too. And there's a lot of staff, like my staff at my daycare, that go to work every day with kids that aren't wearing masks because there's 4, 3, and they're just, when we keep making decisions like this where, you know, okay, it might be too low next week, but we're not going to go to hybrid, even though we said we would. But then if it goes up, you know, 1 week, all of a sudden it's like, nope, back to distance. It doesn't seem like sincere that we are valuing parents and students. And so I think we really need to like focus on just getting kids back and showing the entire community, like that is what we've said that our focus is and our values lie, and we need to really move aggressively towards that.
I found a comment that the RST made, I don't know if it was the MD or the MDH person, but they asked specifically what that pain point was. And that's what they found in most schools was not, it was staffing. It was the quarantine taking its toll and the staffing taking its toll, where the quality had started to diminish. So I think it's important to remember that too.
Kelly actually made a comment on this, I think today, in responding to an email, because we were talking about staffing, and I don't have the email in front of me, but she said that she didn't think that was as much of an issue anymore. Right, Kelly?
Oh, as far as the staff's concerns?
No, like in terms of being able to staff to operate, like being short-staffed, I guess.
Right, we feel like we are addressing that.
So it sounds like ahead of the meeting on the 26th, we need to figure out how many buildings you can make out of one and what grades come back in what priority order.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Correct.
Yep. And in the meantime, we can, I suppose we would need a motion to move forward on.
Yep. Looking for a motion to bring.
I can do that.
Thanks, Drew. Appreciate
I'm good
it.
at in compliance with the updated Minnesota Safe Learning Plan, I make a motion to divert from the board-approved learning model transition plan and transition K4 to in-person model with grades K through 2 beginning Monday, January 25th, and grades 3 through 4 beginning February 8th. In addition, Wednesday, January 20th through Friday, January 22nd will be designated a learning transition days for lower school staff and students.
Looking for a second.
Second. Nicole, you take it. Nicole, you take it.
Okay. So any further discussion?
Sorry, I was still on mute. For that plan, I thought I saw at one point that there was a discussion of that being 4 days a week and then Friday still being distance. Would this be Monday through Friday?
What?
5 days.
Correct, 5 days.
The amendment to clarify?
Yeah, no, I was just gonna say, I was intending to make a friendly amendment to bring back 5, 6 with this. I feel like we should be doing that, but I also want to respect the work that might need to occur to ensure in 10 days that could actually happen too. And so based on the agreement that we've all just made that we'll be presented with the plan for everything to aggressively go back, I don't feel the need to make that now because I want to make sure Kelly and everybody has the time to get those things in place over the next couple of weeks. So I will not be making that amendment.
Okay.
But I think it might be worth putting in the 5 days a week. Is that presumed?
Oh yeah, the clarification.
Oh, the clarification. Okay, yep.
Friendly amendment to clarify it's 5 days a week.
Second. Okay, any further discussion? Okay, hearing none. All those in favor? Aye.
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 Opposed? Hearing none, the motion carries.
Okay.
So I believe that.
So that's it.
Go ahead, John.
Okay, so so I want to get working on the next piece. So we need to have the let's see, probably the we'll start with the committee meeting and the COVID response team meeting. We'll start that immediately, and so we'll get some coordination of that so that we can begin those conversations right away next week to start that conversation, because we have to have something that we're ready to roll with on the 26th. So and so I think we need to be communicating and open with that as we go through this process, answering as many questions and objections as possible, and investigating the creativity as to upper school grades, middle school grades, in person, and so on. But the other piece, and I'm not sure who does this or how to do this, but because that learning model transition plan has been approved by the board, I don't know the way to discuss that the 26th so that it gets modified. I mean, if there's thoughts on that, I just want people to think about that, but we're going to have to try and figure out how to do that and to make sure that we get that expressed in a way that reflects the changes that we've heard from the RST and the emphasis just as of late, if that makes sense.
Yeah, John, I will say that wording to how do we repeal that has already been going through my brain, and I'll take the lead on drafting something that you could take to the RST and say, this is kind of the approach we want to take moving forward, and we can even circulate to this group so we can bring in the motion on the 26th.
Okay.
Excellent. Thank you, Drew.
And Drew, I would just like to ask that you allow the regional support or the COVID support team and the return to school planning team to propose an amendment, or to work with us, that we work as a team to propose that amendment. So it is an organic process that we have buy-in from our staff. And
yeah, and by the time it reaches the meeting on the 26th, everybody should have heard it and read it.
Heard it and touched it. Yeah.
And give an input. That would be great. I think that's essential.
Okay.
And I would strongly encourage, based on Deb and Sarah's feedback about the consistency, that the focus be more on full in-person versus
Yep.
hybrid. Okay.
Agree.
And then, oops, sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, Kelly, you touched on staff a little bit, and with staff, we talked about those COVID the numbers, and people are asking us to assume more risk. But I think that there are a lot of teachers out there who still are not going to feel comfortable with that, and whether or not they feel comfortable, that is something we've discussed as. But I think it's really important that we do communicate with teachers, because just because the board wants to assume more risk and the state wants us to assume more risk, we still have teachers who are on the ground doing this job, and that we do need to talk with them if this is going to be changed, and having this time until the 26th to do that is important.
Right. So I think one of the things I know at least one of the things will be, we'll be joining division meetings, having these conversations, because I know right now I don't know what type of emails are being sent, but you know what I mean? This is always a changing environment, and we have to try and have conversations, listen to concerns, and just try and address the concerns that are out there.
This is slightly unrelated, but I know at one point of having a testing site for the community at large, like the entire school community, rather than just staff. And one of the reasons that we talked about that is to try to discover, what happened over the holidays before we could potentially come back. Did the state pull that? Is there a reason why it's just staff now? Is there enough testing locations, other places that they felt? Okay.
If you want, I can answer that. But yeah, they pulled those and told us we couldn't have them. And part of that was because they were transitioning to doing so much in every school across the state, as well as that they had beefed up all of their community testing. And so they felt like they had a real solid community testing program going on for access for everyone else.
Okay.
And then staff can always go to those too. They aren't required to only come to ours.
Right. And then in any of those conversations that you've had with MDH through the regional support team, has there been any communication about where teachers are in that vaccine list? I know that was originally in that 1B category, but that's a big category. So I didn't know if they had mentioned with the move to prioritize getting students back, if they had given any indication to you guys.
They have not. 1A is prioritized into 3 areas, and I have not heard about 1B and its priorities.
Yep. Okay.
Candace, if you could, I know I got a couple of emails just this week about this. Can you clarify what the policy is going to be on quarantines when we return to school?
We'll continue to follow the MDH exclusion guideline as far as quarantine goes. The current one is that in detail, 1 less common symptom, you should stay home for 24 hours until symptom free, so that if you come up with any other symptoms, you haven't been in the building. 2 less common or 1 more common, you and siblings or children, if you're a staff member, need to go home. And then the options are a 10-day if you have symptoms. If you get a COVID test and it's negative, you can come back. So then anybody in your household, then if you were the one with symptoms, anyone in your household then can come back. If you're a positive COVID and it's a close contact, and you're quarantined because you're a close contact, 14 days is still the recommended. We, unlike many schools, did elect there is some shortened quarantine options, but they have a lot of qualifiers. But if it's not from your household, and household can mean too, like our families that have 2 households, if you were in that household or you just visited for a weekend, so it's you spent the night and lived there like a weekend, that's kind of a household. So if you aren't a household member and that's not your contact, if you get a negative COVID test, PCR COVID test, on day 5 or later,
5 days.
you can apply to or request that you have a 7-day, and if your test comes back negative. If you don't want to get a test and you want to wait 10 days and you haven't had any symptoms, then you can come back. However, from day 8 to 14, if you have any symptom, even one, runny nose, you're out and back in your 14-day quarantine.
Right.
So there it is.
And do we
But-
have
but-
a? oh,
Yes,
sorry.
so we will let the families administer that. Is that correct, Candace? I mean,
We're
well,
asking,
I mean, from the registration form and that sort of thing.
right, I put together a shortened, borrowed from another school nurse, shortened quarantine request form where if they check all the boxes and get that, as well as if it's a 7-day, they have to provide us with the PCR test with the date on it so that we can make sure that it was given on the correct day, because I guarantee you some will get it on the wrong day. And it has to be a PCR test. So they have to give us that documentation, and we need that before they come to school, so that we can assure that they've met those pieces. So
And
yeah, we're asking families to do that.
I'm quite sure many people listening are wondering if that is also going to be requested of or required of the staff to attempt to follow the
All
7,
of that. Yeah.
which would lessen the time out of the building, which is critical for staffing.
And I apologize if I just missed this, but it might be a good idea to, I don't know if you just, it sounds like from what you read, you just followed the decision tree that MDH has. It might be a good idea to have that right on like the website or on the form, just so that if there's questions, there's the decision tree. It's from the Department of Public Health. And that way it's really like kind of clear cut.
Good.
All right. So that sounds like everybody's questions got answered. Excellent. So looking for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. All right, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Everybody have a wonderful night.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Thanks. Good night.